welcome. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half an hour, we'll see what's making headlines with the barrister and futurist Andrew Eborn and the journalist and author Christina Patterson. So let's see what is on some of those front pages, and we'll start with The Observer, which has seen leaked documents which it says show the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove is to announce plans this week to ban individuals and groups from public life who the government deemed to be extremists. The Sunday Telegraph has spoken to Mr Gove, who's told pro-Palestinian demonstrators they risk rubbing shoulders with extremists if they join marches against the conflict in Gaza. The Sunday Times says that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson flew to Venezuela last month to try and discourage Nicolás Maduro, the country's leader, from sending military supplies to Russia. The Sunday Express headline, Labour are cowards over boats crisis, the words of the Home Secretary in an interview with the paper. The Mirror reports that the mother of the murdered trans teenager, Brianna Ghey, has launched a campaign in schools aimed at having lessons in kindness and mindfulness made a part of the curriculum. The Sunday People looks at the killing of baby P in 2007 and news that his stepfather may soon be granted parole. And The Sun on Sunday has news of the new love life for Hugh Bonneville. And a reminder, by scanning the QR code that you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. And as I said, tonight we're joined by the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the barrister and futurist Andrew Eborn. Christina, Andrew, thanks both
Good to see you.
With us. Lovely to see you both. Let's get straight on with it, shall we? And let's start with this story on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, story that's making a few of the papers. Why don't you take us through the reporting here, Andrew? This is about Michael Gove and new definitions.
Yes, and this is the problem. It's always the balancing act, isn't it, between freedom of speech and freedom from consequences. And we've been seeing some terrible things on the streets where the hate online has spilled out onto the streets. And they're now trying to introduce this new definition of extremism. And they're saying that it's anything that undermines the UK system of liberal democracy. And the real question is, do we need this? We've already got laws in place. The Terrorism Act is very clear. What we need is enforcement of those laws. So when you're basically supporting what's a terrorist organisation, there are laws in place. It's against the law. We need to see that enforced. But the right to protest is a fundamental right. We don't want to miss out that right. The right of freedom of speech is a fundamental right. Yeah. What we need to stamp out are things which are incredibly dangerous on that sort of basis.
There's no sense in the reporting, is there, Christina, that there's going to be new groups prescribed as terrorist organisations, or that there's going to be new law, is there?
Yeah, I think there is, actually. I think that, well, I'm not sure about a new law, but I think... and not necessarily about terrorist groups, but I think the consequences could be quite serious in terms of engagement with public bodies. And, for example, if you applied to be on a board of a public organisation, public appointments, and public appointments have actually been very severely vetted in the past few years, unless, of course, you are giving money to Boris Johnson for his golden wallpaper, in which case, obviously, you get expedited. But in the absence of that, for example, people on the left have found it very hard. Often you get ministers. I know that Mary Beard, for example, was originally not going to be a trustee of the British Museum because she is famously sort of not exactly in favour of the Tory government. So I think there has been a dangerous shift in recent years, which I wouldn't call extremist, but I would call not exactly, well, unconservative, really, a kind of banning of free speech in that context. So I think this is a bit worrying, and I think if it is about prescribing people having engagement with... well, they're not very clear about what it's going to involve, but I think it's an unhealthy move. What I would say in Michael Gove's favour is I agree with him that people on marches should be careful who they march with, because if you are walking next to people who are essentially calling for the obliteration of Israel, which the slogan From the River to the Sea does, then I think you should be careful, because anti-Semitism has risen enormously since the events of 7th of October, and anything that might be seen to be endorsing that rise in anti-Semitism, I certainly wouldn't want to be associated with. So, I mean, I think everyone should be careful at the moment. I can't imagine there's anyone in the country or in the world, really, or not many people, who can be watching what's going on in Gaza and thinking, oh, yes, you know, let's continue it, let's escalate it, let's deprive all the Palestinians of food and all the help they need. I think most people in the world at this point want some kind of ceasefire. But if you are in the process of asking for that, also saying that Israel should be obliterated, then obviously you are stepping over a line.
Yeah, it's not helping, is it? Let's stay with the region and its stories around it. And this is also on the front of the Telegraph. This is about Lord Cameron. The headline there's urged to stop sniping at Israel. What's the...
Well, and that's the basic thing, it's saying his anti-Israel sentiment. And I think the reality is somebody's got to have an alternative view. It's not just about peddling the same sort of narrative. War is abhorrent. It's abhorrent on both sides. There are casualties on both sides. And I think what we need to do is get away from the rhetoric that we have, which is basically inflammatory. And I think in the media we have a responsibility to make sure that we can shine more light and less heat. The call for a ceasefire is absolutely right. But highlighting the differences and the difference in approach and putting labels on people as a result of it is very dangerous.
Yeah, Christina?
Well, I don't think... I think it's... Theresa Villiers, I'm afraid, always seems to be on the wrong side of things, and she's one of the MPs who has apparently called on Lord Cameron, David Cameron, to stop sniping at Israel. I think to point out that Israel appears to be breaking international law, particularly in relation to the provision of aid and food. That's hardly... I mean, that's his job. That is literally his job as Foreign Secretary.
And that judgment's going to be made in the next few days, whether they are breaking human rights.
Exactly. So I think personally, these Tory MPs should be very careful. This government was very careful to support Israel when it was attacked by Hamas, and it was absolutely right to do that. But if Israel is breaking international law, and it certainly seems to be, then this government and David Cameron as Foreign Secretary should be pointing that out. Yeah.
OK, let's move on to the front of the Times. And this is a story that made my jaw drop when I read it, and some of the details in it are fantastic too. When you talk us through this, I mean, the headline in itself is fantastic. Johnson through the secret talks with autocrat.
Well, it's great. And what I love as well is the Newman cartoon tying in with the Oscars at the moment, saying that the best acting foreign secretary, and there's a wonderful statue of Boris Johnson. And this is what he's got. He's met with a Venezuelan leader. He's pushing the case for Ukraine, which is a good thing. The point I would make is that this is not going to be unknown to certain people in the party. I think it's putting him front and centre for maybe political ambitions maybe a bit further down the line. But if there's some good that come out of it, then all credit to Boris. I know you're a fan.
I'm a huge fan of Boris Johnson.
What do you think about it? I mean, it's not quite freelancing, is it? Because I think everyone kind of...
Well, I think that's not clear. I think that's not clear, actually. And it certainly looks like freelancing. And I also think it looks a little bit sort of amateur hour if the UK is kind of with a nod and a wink sending out its semi-populist former Prime Minister who was ousted for essentially bad behaviour to go and meet, you know, a definite populist with whom our country doesn't actually have diplomatic relations. So I think it's all... it's very weird, is what it is.
It is, it's true.
And whether...
from Dominican Republic by private jet for less than 6 hours.
Exactly. And I mean, who paid for it? We don't know. I mean, if Boris Johnson can do some good here, great. But there aren't all that many situations in life that you think will be improved by Boris Johnson's intervention.
It's all about trying to bring Venezuela into our orbit, I guess, in the war against Russia. So we'll see how that plays out. And also, I guess we will find out how that flight was paid for.
There you go.
All right, another story on the front of the Times, and this, you know, a few days on from the budget and that cut to national insurance, and now we're hearing from the Prime Minister going to squeeze benefits to...
Well, it's always the thing. Whenever you're talking about these things, whether you're talking about raising taxes or reducing it, something's got to give. It's a balancing act, isn't it, between what sort of benefits you've got and 2p or not 2p. I mean, the thing on national insurance, it was $4 billion less to do it on national insurance than it was to do it with income tax, which was the thing they're talking about. But clearly something's got to give. And if you don't have the benefits there, or you don't have the money to pay for it, they're going to have to be cut.
And what do you make of the idea? I don't think it's the first time he's talked about cutting down on benefits.
You know, I think this is disgraceful. I think it's absolutely disgraceful to make a promise that you are going to cut national insurance without even working out how you're going to fund it. And in fact, most people don't even want their national insurance cut. What most people want is functioning public services. But to then say you will do that by cutting disability benefits, I think you can't get lower than that, frankly. And he's talking about encouraging people back into work or encouraging people with disabilities to work from home. Have they ever tried? The number of people people with disabilities who try to get into jobs and can't. And the number of older people, they're constantly going on about how people are now on the golf course. Guess what? They're not on the golf course. They're not in work because many of them over the age of 50 cannot get employment. And on the Today programme in the last couple of days, there have been people talking about their highly qualified, fit, healthy people over the age of 60 who've been unable to get back into work. So I think this is absolutely disgraceful. If you really want to support people with disabilities or mental ill health into work, you put money into it, because getting people into work is an expensive, difficult thing, and you offer them support. Instead of which, the ageism and disability prejudice of employers towards people who, even totally able people who are older have problems, but most people with disabilities have enormous problems.
The thing to do is to avoid an abuse of the system. So there are some who are abusing the system, which is the point. If they can stamp that out, but those who legitimately need help should be helped. It's an interesting
headline, isn't it? Because it speaks to you immediately about disability benefits, but of course it speaks as well about those who may well be abusing the system. Which is what I think the point of
that's the proper narrative for the interest of balance.
Right. OK. All right, guys, thank you very much for that. Plenty more from you after the break, including this story in the Sunday Telegraph, where they talk about the crisis in masculinity that's prompted Labour to rethink its policy on men's health. Stay with us for that. Hello and welcome back. You're watching the press preview. I'm joined by the barrister and futurist, Andrew Eborn, and the journalist and author, Christina. Patterson. Guys, thanks for sticking around. Let's take a look at this story on the front of the Telegraph. The headline, Crisis in Masculinity Prompts Labour Strategy for Men's Health.
It's a great story, and it falls just beneath, we should mention about the England rugby and the fly half Marcus Smith. England slams the Irish hopes in the last minute.
It was a hell of a finish to that game.
Hell of a finish, and that's dominating a lot of the papers, and one of the particular producers wanted us to mention that. So we've done that.
Wilson, you got it.
Crisis in masculinity, it's a fantastic thing which should be spoken about. One of the biggest issues and the biggest killers of men under 50 is suicide. So a highlight on men's health is really, really key. What we need to do is be the generation that talks about mental health so that the next generation doesn't suffer the stigma. So what Labour have said, look, they want to have a strategy for men's health. This was something which has actually been talked about for a long time. We had the comedian Jeff Norcott, who famously spoke about that on a BBC programme fairly recently. And that's the sort of key. We need to talk about men's health, work on appropriate ways that we can make sure that we can prevent suicide and provide assistance where necessary.
Christian, what do you make of it? Because the word masculinity, I think, for many years has had a bit of a bad rep. Toxic masculinity has been the prefix to it. So what do you make of this idea?
Well, I think it is important, but I don't think it's just about talking. I mean, Wes Streeting, I think Wes Streeting is going to be a really superb health secretary, assuming Labour get into power, which they will. And,
not necessarily.
And I think
might have an election first.
And he is, as a working class man who grew up with real poverty, he knows what he's talking about when he talks about the crisis for working class boys. And I think that many boys do not have the educational resources and the support they need to get into careers that will satisfy them. And I think that it's a public health issue. It's not just about talking about your mental health. It's about providing people with good lives and good infrastructure, and then you will be healthier. But
it is that idea of masculinity, isn't it? Because it seems to be going around in a bit of a cycle.
Yes.
Right? We were told, my generation was told, to not be overtly masculine.
Yeah.
Too often,
it always comes with the word toxic masculinity, and that's the problem. And they need good role models. We always think about Andrew Tate and so on and so forth, and what's happened to the younger generation as opposed to that sort of stuff. People are desperate for great role models. What we need to do is provide them with those role models, but recognise the particular strains that they have.
Well, everyone needs to feel valued, whether you're male or female, and there are traditionally different models of doing that. But what makes nobody feel valued is not having job prospects, and I think that's what's so important here. Yeah,
and as we mentioned, of course, talking about
talk
is hugely,
always good to talk.
Important. All right, this is a story on the front of the Sunday Mirror that I know we want to discuss. Esther Ghey, mum of Brianna Ghey, who of course was brutally murdered last year, has started a campaign. I mean, this is a continuing campaign, isn't it, to make sure that her daughter
absolutely. And
has a legacy.
Mother's Day, as you say, and what a great story, and what an inspirational woman, and the absolute devastation having lost her child, and the compassion that she showed to the parents of the murderers is quite extraordinary. So what Esther's doing is she's going to the classroom this week to launch a campaign to have mindfulness lessons and greater understanding about the challenges, and also helping the parents as well to understand the dangers out there of social media and access to certain channels and so on and so forth. So all credit to her for doing that, but just thinking about the devastation she's going to feel on Mother's Day without Brianna there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just mindfulness as well. The headline, I mean, it's kindness.
Kindness,
well.
exactly.
And she is human to one another.
She is the exact embodiment of kindness. She is a truly extraordinary woman. And I think that some of this has sprung about because the sense from people on the internet, unfortunately, it does often foster a view that other people aren't real, that the person you are insulting, whether it's on a social media platform or any other form, isn't a living flesh and blood person like you. And I think the more we can remind people that other people are real and that hurling, obviously it starts with abuse and insults, but in their case they went further than anyone could really ever imagine. But I think for Esther Ghey to be giving her time, she's turned this into a mission. I think it's an extraordinary thing. Yeah, really absolutely. Extraordinary.
That's a wonderful sentiment to leave on. Christina, Andrew, thanks both very much for being with us this evening. Really appreciate it. Thank you.